SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Anthony Kennada, co-founder and CEO of Audience Plus, an owned media software for marketers, enabling companies to build, engage, and monetize an owned audience. Hey, that sounds really great. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate you having me on.
And before we get into the meat of the podcast, could you just give people a little bit of your background and about your company?
Yeah, so I'm actually a former CMO for the last decade plus, and only recently made the transition to founder CEO. And a big part of what I've learned just in my kind of marketing journey is just the power of thought leadership, of building thought leadership, of leveraging it in order to actually monetize and grow revenue, impact pipeline. I think for so long we've thought of that as a brand or corporate marketing initiative that sits outside of the growth equation. And I found just the opposite to be true. Really incubated that at Gainsight, where I was the founding CMO and built that business up to about 100 million of ARR at the time that I was there. And now sort of wanting to introduce kind of new technology to help other companies really scale and monetize thought leadership, which led me to founding Audience Plus.
Well, I don't know if you remember from our setup conversation about a week ago, this is a subject near and dear to my heart. We in the agency here have long thought leadership was an important part of how we would position our clients for growth, profitability, and in many cases an exit. And there's now, instead of just our gut feel, there's a lot of data out there, like the LinkedIn Edelman study on thought leadership that I think they run just about every year. And they do seek to quantify the value of thought leadership in terms of the better contract size, better valuation. There's just so many ways that being effective at thought leadership can drive good things for an organization and its founders. So let's kind of dig into it. So CMO to founder, you're not the first subject matter expert I've met who's gone into the software business. It's been a couple of years, right, that you've been doing this?
About 18 months.
So what are the lessons learned so far trying to build and scale up a startup software company?
So many. And so what's been interesting is, a lot of my exposure as an operator to, different elements of the business, I think were helpful. I had a chance to basically study under Nick Maida for, I guess, most of my career at two companies, including Gainsight. And so I had a chance to kind of through osmosis, see what it means to be a values-driven CEO and how to sort of kind of run the company. And a lot of that, I think, has benefited my thinking. But there aren't a lot of great resources for unless you just go and do it. Like, how do you set up your bookkeeping as an early stage company? How do you think about like accounting, and how do you structure an investor update, and all of these sort of like operational elements to actually going from 0 to 1? Like, as a small business, should we be a PEO so we can offer better healthcare coverage for our customers, all of our employees? All of these things were things we had to learn kind of along the way. But the third bit too, I think that's been helpful is actually like leaning into first principles. And so the way we launched our company, wasn't a traditional kind of company launch for a, beta, early stage, only a handful of customers type of business. And so I do think there's also this almost benefit to not having a lot of tenure in the company building side. and bringing a lot of that operator, at least in my experience, marketing experience, kind of into now being a CEO.
So when you say you didn't do a beta, what did you do?
Oh, no, we did a beta. What we didn't do was, I think the traditional kind of company launch at our stage is like, launch the thing, maybe do a product hunt, maybe get, hopefully get the TechCrunch article or something along those lines. We planned this like 4-hour LinkedIn live takeover that had like a celebrity guest, had, CMOs and content leaders and demand leaders join. We did this big kind of keynote reveal, leveraged the LinkedIn network to have about 900 registrations, but it turned into about 5,000 viewers just based on the virality of the platform. And so, those are the types of decisions that, I think a marketer might have had some creative sort of bias towards kind of pushing, where if you're an early stage founder, you're not thinking about that. You're like, how do we just get on Product Hunt and try to get to the top of that list and maybe get the TechCrunch article, because we're still early and don't have a lot of, track record at this point to really anchor on. So,
Well, I think that what you're saying there is that kind of thinking broadly about it, creative is part of what drove the launch here, right? Thinking creatively, using media creatively.
Yeah.
That's a big theme for me now. I kind of feel like we're almost closing the door on the old inbound marketing playbook.
Yeah.
And the lead gen playbook. So like predictable revenue, kind of done. Inbound SEO, not done, but harder and harder and harder. So we have to get back to being really creative and giving people a real reason to tune in, right? To tune into us as a brand and company. So that's
Absolutely.
very cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I talk about this a lot, but I think in the language we've used for the last few decades in marketing was around marketing automation, as if we were going to automate our ability to generate revenue and impact the bottom line. And, to your point, I think there was a lot of good that came from inbound marketing. And in some cases, like, it still makes sense to really invest in that. But now we're kind of like paying for the sins of trying to automate a process of building trust and relationship and serving an audience of people that we're trying to, hopefully turn into customers. And it's hard to completely automate that process, right? It requires creativity, it requires, investment and kind of being kind of bold and thinking. And so I think there's almost this renaissance happening to going back to kind of the original intent of being a marketer and finding ways to build an audience, but then reach and serve and create value for an audience in a much more authentic way.
Yeah, I think the pendulum is swinging, right? And my business, it's about 40 years old. It predates me being in it. And at one point, I don't know, about 15, 18 years ago, our tagline was the art and science of business marketing. I think we need more art right now. And so congrats on that great launch concept and
thank you.
Success. That's really great. But I think it goes to something we talked about when we did our prep, which was that the media kind of just sort of exploding on us, right?
Yeah.
The landscape of media choices that we as marketers have has never been more varied.
Yep.
Harder to generate an audience, harder to generate impact. Tell me how that figures into the business reason for Audience Plus to exist.
Yeah. Well, it's never been noisier on the internet today. And I'm not sure that the generative AI kind of tools are going to help in that particular area. It's just becoming easier to ship like good enough written content on the internet. And so I think what we're observing is as we look to our personal lives outside the context of being, buyers within a kind of, B2B context, how are we engaging with information that we care about? We're listening to podcasts just like this one, or we're watching video series, or we're joining live streams and live events where we can kind of get that human connection. And when we look at our content teams internally, again, back within our B2B context, we're either still writing SEO, blog posts, anchor pages to try to rank on an algorithm, to maybe drive organic traffic to the website, to potentially drive inbound lead flow around that effort. And we're not spending much time, or at least I say that in the sort of making an assumption here that's a bit more wide, but as an industry, we're not spending enough time creating content for humans in the formats in which we are consuming that content today. And so I think that's sort of the conflict within content and demand teams today, is we're so focused still and over-indexed on just doing the written content for an algorithm that we haven't yet unlocked the ability to produce content that breaks through the noise and actually is able to reach our audience in a more impactful way. So that helps set the stage for kind of what we're doing with Audience Plus. But I think the problem that we're really interested in is the distribution side of that content, because we know paid media is becoming increasingly inefficient. Our relationship with social media is changing. We have this sort of desire and this almost like existential need to be building a first-party data set around our audience. And so that's really where we're going to be focused on building kind of products and best practices around.
So there's a lot there. I just want to sort of dice it up just a little bit.
Yeah.
So starting last first. So first-party data, important because we're going to lose the cookie someday, right? So we're going to lose the opportunity to get third-party.
That's right.
Attribution and audience, right? So we're going to lose that whole world. And I think the impact there is going to make the paid media even harder to make work, right? Because our targeting is going to get less precise. And it's already expensive. And for years, I've called it, the crack cocaine of marketing, right? I mean, we spend the money, we get the buzz, but we have to keep spending the money, and the buzz gets more expensive and the buzz isn't as good.
Yep.
And it just gets harder and harder to get to where we want to go.
That's right.
So we need to create the momentum within our own media world, right? That's really what it boils down to. And then we'll have the insight into who the audience is or could be, and we'll have less reliance on the paid traffic, which we still have to do, right? We're going to have to do that. Especially young companies that don't have a big footprint, they're going to have to build a footprint somehow.
Yeah.
But maybe they'll do things like your launch, right? So there'll be a little breakthrough and gain some efficiency as well. But I think also this behavior that you sort of ran through very quickly, it's what we as marketers do. And sort of the themes of my criticism of marketing is that we're like 8-year-olds chasing the soccer ball. And so, back in the day, all print advertising with bingo cards. Then it was all content marketing with landing pages. Then it's intent data.
Yeah.
So now, if anybody shows any intent to buy a piece of software like for accounting, they're going to be hounded by 30 people who sell accounting software. So the value of intent data, from my vantage point, it's not long lived either.
Yeah.
So maybe a good question to ask is, how is that playing into the idea of thought leadership? Is it that not enough people have done it for a while or done it well enough that its time has come again? Or was it always a good time to be doing thought leadership?
It's a good question. I mean, I think there's something hard-coded in our social psychology as humans around emotional brand narratives, or our ability to connect with a brand or a person or whatever in a way that goes beyond just kind of functional or utilitarian value. So for us in B2B land, it's taken us a while to understand that. Where in the consumer world, it's always been this sort of emotional narrative that influences people's buying decisions. You think of Simon Sinek talking about people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Yet we spend so much time in product marketing talking and positioning and creating messaging around our what and our how, and frankly, not enough about our why. So I think this has been a problem for some time. I think folks are sort of starting to wake up to the idea that, okay, if we can actually develop an emotional brand narrative, we can set ourselves apart from the others in perhaps a commoditized market, or if you believe that all SaaS products at some point in history are kind of on the path towards commoditization, it's a competitive differentiator. It helps us break through the noise, and it helps us develop that authentic, deeper relationship with our prospects and would-be customers that leads to sustainable revenue that renews, and sustainable revenue that isn't transactional. It's built on the belief of, again, relationship. So that's where I think it's been well appreciated in the consumer context. It's been underappreciated in B2B. And there's this new sort of awakening happening where it's being viewed now as a strategic part of the marketing mix and not the side project, the corporate marketing, thing that is not connected to revenue.
So I see this also as an opportunity for sales and marketing to align more on the messaging. Like, one of my favorite guys online is Brian Burns. He has the Brutal Truth About Sales podcast, and he's a sales trainer. And he always is talking about it's a relationship business.
Yes.
And so perhaps this is the opportunity for marketing and sales to kind of march together to build better relationships with people who might one day want to be our customers, as opposed to this old world of manufacturing the MQL that then we sort of pitch over the fence to the poor salespeople who've seen 1,000 MQLs just like it,
Right.
and struggle through them. So I just think there's so much there. I want to talk about this idea that our brands, our companies should be media companies. And I know this gets a little bit into the heart of your proposition, but I think it's also a mindset that is probably really new for many outside of the marketing function. So if you could talk a little bit about not only the idea that we should consider ourselves media companies, but also what does it take to gain consensus in the C-suite around that strategy? Because I think there's where sometimes these initiatives either don't get started or they don't have enough sponsor buy-in that they become hard to sustain. So I think that'd be a really great place for you to talk a little bit.
So part of this is the media itself. And so we talked, I think, a little bit about just this transition happening from written SEO content to more editorial formats like video, podcasts like this one, live streams. And I think that is well understood. At least, someone can look at kind of what's happening in, the digital kind of space and say, okay, clearly there's a movement here on the format of content. But when we talk about becoming more like a media company, we're typically referring less to the actual content and more to this idea of owning the relationship with your audience, because that's something that is relatively new, or at least not yet expressed in the same way that it has been in sort of years past. And the idea is that a media company has this notion of a subscription, which is much different than a website conversion or an opt-in to our marketable database. Like all that stuff, I guess technically is the same thing. But a subscription is rooted in this exchange of value, or this kind of like relationship orientation around why somebody fills out that form. And so you see this most kind of predominantly in the kind of benchmarks around website conversion, where the traditional B2B SaaS website sees a 1, maybe 2% conversion rate across their traffic, leading with commercial calls to action, like get demo, talk to sales, all those types of things. The traditional consumer media site sees about a 10% conversion rate. So nearly a 10x improvement in web conversions when leading with education and value and this sort of sense of free kind of value exchange, I suppose. So that's sort of why we talk about this idea of becoming more like a media company. Is we're letting 98, 99% of our web traffic bounce, where there are people that are just not yet ready to buy, especially in 2023, but they're interested in the topic, or they want to feel like they belong into this sort of category that you're espousing and trying to resource as a brand. And so the way we talk about this to the C-suite is as follows. One, with owned media, which is sort of the parent kind of category we're trying to carve out around it, your costs of distribution go down to zero if you do this right. And so there is an efficient growth story here. And it's not to say we throw away paid media in terms of actually building and acquiring audience, or we throw away social media, because that's critically important to actually building audience. But as we get effective and we start kind of building our own audience of subscribers to our brand, that's when the cost of distribution start getting much, much more efficient. And so there's an efficiency story there. And the last thing I'll just share is we talked about first party data. Sure, definitely believe that the kind of shifting tides around data privacy and third party cookies are a major driver. But if you own your audience data and an understanding of that engagement, data that you're not getting from YouTube, or you're not getting from Spotify or LinkedIn or any, and frankly, even from your web analytics provider on your CMS today, you're able to actually attribute the value of all of this content on outcomes, on pipeline creation, acceleration, revenue, customer satisfaction, whatever. And so there's this idea of being able to prove the impact of investment when you're kind of operating from this owned perspective. And I think in this economic season, when you talk to CFOs and FP and all of that, that's kind of the heart of the investment decisions within marketing. And I think that's kind of what we can help with when investing from an owned media point of view.
Yeah, I think also I want to just tie it back to something you touched on earlier, which I'm going to say it a little differently, but I don't think there's a real software moat that is sustainable for long term, right? If
Sure.
I come up with a way to make my images 3D on the screen, somebody's going to figure out a way to do it too if it becomes popular.
Right. Right.
But the relationship that we might have, if we really build it and we really care about that relationship and we have a value exchange,
Yeah.
it's really hard to break relationships.
Totally.
So I think we can have both an emotional, like a gut level conversation with the C-suite about the difference. And I think you can say it just like that. You know, you may or may not believe in the software moat, but we all know that since Microsoft copied Apple's, interface,
Yeah.
there has been no software moat in the end.
Yeah.
But there is relationship moat. And I think that's one way to, on top of the analytical part, to get people to understand in their gut, which is kind of how I think people make a decision. They kind of gut it and then they want to back that up with some rationalization. So I think we need both.
Yeah. Agreed.
You kind of fainted here also at maybe you have some analytics that aren't widely available elsewhere that come out of your platform. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's our contribution to this movement, is really around the data model, where when you're operating in the traditional CMS construct, so your blog or your resource center, whatever is today your kind of owned surface on your website, we're beholden to web analytics technology. So Google Analytics or whatever, to give us like anonymized impression data. Where are they accessing the content from? Is it from a desktop or a mobile device? And that's sort of like, the world that we're stuck in. Or we put our content on YouTube and Spotify, these other places, which again, fits within the strategy and the playbook for doing owned media right. But the data that we get back is anonymous number of views, right? Or listens and those types of things. So that's where we get stuck in the B2B construct, is like, we want to do the media thing, but we can't prove that any of the stuff's actually driving revenue. And so what we're introducing is effectively new web infrastructure that's kind of replacing the traditional CMS for your blog or resource center or your kind of standalone media property. And by sort of giving you the ability to build subscribers in our platform, we're able to go beyond the sort of anonymous number of impressions and give you rich individual level, account level data around engagement and how is your audience actually engaging with your content? What are the topics that they care about? What are the distribution channels by which they're discovering your content? And what that unlocks is several things. We talked about kind of the downstream impact from an ROI point of view and attribution, but also kind of the Netflixification, if you will, of content production. Like, what if we can tell you these are the 6 or 7 topics that resonate with your sort of cohort of target buyers? Go on and create more content around that. That's how sort of modern media companies are making production decisions. And we're here kind of still looking at SEO keywords and kind of framing a lot of our production decisions around that. So I think that there's so much inherent value from a first party data perspective. We're using a lot of machine learning and how we're sort of generating those insights from the kind of data fire hose. But that's what I think becomes the future of not just content production, but also just a lot of the decision-making we do around distribution that leads to not just developing that relationship moat, but monetizing it over time into pipeline. And that's, I think, the part of this media company thing that has been missing, is this over-reliance on the CMS kind of 1.0 vision. And we're trying to introduce kind of a new vision for 2.0.
I think that's really well said. And I guess it begs the question, like if I have a Marketo or a HubSpot or something else in my tech stack, how do you guys fit in with that? And do these tools work together to help me decide what to do?
Absolutely. So we'll integrate completely into your marketing automation stack. Over time, I think there's some incremental value that we could provide there. But I guess having been a CMO, like certainly interoperability, fitting into the MarkOps kind of, charter, we want to make sure that we're working well with not just your marketing automation tools, but de-anonymization tools like Clearbit and 6 Sense and others, and thinking a lot about how we kind of fit within that overall kind of market map.
To sales management, do sales people get a benefit right away, or do they have to wait for
Yeah.
marketing to distill that?
Over time, I think we're getting into roadmap a little bit, but man, we'd love to surface a lot of these account level insights directly to the sales team. For today, we're kind of giving language to marketing. And so if you could look at, basically understanding your target account list or your forecasted accounts for maybe this quarter, or your customers who are at risk of churn, and try to use that as a lens on top of your engagement data and get a sense of, who's leaning into what conversations and how can you provide value as a sales rep or as a CSM. I think there's a lot that can be done there. On the product side, it's still early for us. And so we're kind of focusing in on marketing for now, but absolutely think there is cross-departmental value that can be unlocked once you're able to deeply know your audience and how you can better serve them as a company.
Fair enough. But in today's world, so marketing can help sales point in the right direction.
Yes.
Show the team where there might be some potential engagement to have.
Totally. If we're forecasting a deal to close this quarter, and this is a set of accounts that aren't even engaging with our content at all, that's a signal, or you have a customer that's at risk, but they're highly engaged around certain topics or certain kind of things. That's an opportunity to find ways to jump in and provide some value. So I absolutely think even in today's world, we're trying to create opportunity for marketing to have a more active role beyond just the pipeline generation kind of motions, and help be good partners to sales and CS.
Yeah. So I want to just dig in just a little bit on the target account and their behavior with thought leadership, from good to bad, right? And how that might play out. So if we have an account, we're trying to sell to Lucid Motors or something, and they're not reading our stuff, right? And we've put it in front of who we think are our likely buyers. How will we know that? And what are we going to do about it? And then conversely, if they're a target account and the salespeople don't have a good feeling for it, how do they benefit from consumption that you can track?
Yeah, I'd say in the former, I think we need to better understand how the impact of content and community and all of these things actually influence the sales cycle. And some of this might be, contextual to an industry or a specific company. But at Gainsight, we found that if an open opportunity did not come to our conference or engage with any of the thought leadership, that cohort was effectively had a higher propensity to not close. And so engagement was directly correlated to outcome. Again, that may not be the case for every business, but I think in my own kind of experience, that's what I had seen. And so I think we need to better understand that. And what we would surface really is the data side, to which today is anonymized again with web analytics, but being able to answer those questions hey, let's look up this specific account and see, do we have any subscribers from that account within our owned instance? Do we have anyone that has engaged from that, de-anonymized IP address that is from Lucid Motors or whatever? And so we'll be able to, I think, answer some of those questions. But I think the more interesting thing is the latter bit, right? If we actually know on a cohorted basis that companies in the EV space, or I don't know what you put that in, I guess manufacturing maybe, or automotive.
I have EVs on the mind.
So. Exactly. I remember, in our earlier conversation, if that cohort of our audience tends to really resonate deeply with these three topics, or if we know that we've already produced content that is highly correlated with some type of acceleration of the buyer's journey or deeper engagement within that cohort, can we surface those insights to either the marketer or the sales professional to send them that podcast episode, send them that video series that we did, or that PDF or whatever? That's, I think, the value, where a lot of this context today is in a black box. It's in the Google Analytics black box. We have no idea. So I think that's the role that we play, at least, is being able to surface those insights using machine learning and graph theory and all of these things that are going into our platform to be able to help close those deals, or said another way, provide more value to the prospect or customer.
So I think it's really interesting. I wrote a blog post, it must be 7 years ago, when Google stopped giving you the personal information from who was searching, who was arriving and leaving. And I guess it's really an opportunity, if you take owned media to its fullest extent, you can insulate yourself from a lot of this third-party limitation.
Yes.
knowing who your customers and prospects are and what they care about.
That's the message that we're bringing to market, for better or for worse. I think it's true. Like, I feel like we've lost control as an industry because we've relied so much on third parties for distribution or data or all of these things that we feel that we've lost control of our ability to impact the business. So that's where I think owned media provides, again, I'm not suggesting like, it solves everything, but I really do think it gives us some control back into our kind of lead to revenue process and the ability to influence it, to understand the data a bit better and not be at the whims of shifting algorithms or data, regulation and these types of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like going to be a whole world of where we participate. And part of that pie is our own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if we do a good job with that, expanding that pie that's our own, we'll know a lot more about our customers and prospects. And that's got to be a good thing.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right.
Hey, so my favorite question for every thoughtful podcast guest is looking back over the last couple of years, is there a decision you would love to revisit? And if so, what was it and why?
Oh, timing is rough asking this question with my last employer in the news. It's really hard to have a ton of regret. I think even any bad decisions made, I think there's some real valuable learning that kind of came from that. So I think my answer would be a very loaded no. But I would say as we think about kind of the career decisions we make, it's how we respond to them that matters. I never would have taken the entrepreneurial leap to becoming a CEO had I not been, at Hopin and saw kind of a front row seat, behind that industry and the company and all of that. So I would say no with a strong asterisk.
Well, I think that's really fair. Certainly I try and take away learning from just about every experience. And sometimes we have decisions we wouldn't take again. And that's the learning, right? I wouldn't do whatever it is. But fair enough. It's good to live a life with few regrets. And I certainly don't regret having you as a guest on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. If people want to learn more about your company or be in touch, how can they do that?
Yeah, best way, if you go to audienceplus.com, we're producing a lot of content around this. We're trying to walk the walk as well, help companies kind of actually operationalize owned media or modernize their current owned media approach. So you can subscribe there and access to a lot of our content for free. And I'm on LinkedIn, of course, as everyone is. So we would love to connect with folks there as well.
Perfect. And people want to reach me on LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, maybe Anthony's episode has convinced you must. So please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. Anthony Kennada, thanks so much for being a guest here on SaaS Backwards.
Thanks, Ken. It was great.
Was indeed. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.